Hello, my name's Michael Wickerson, and I moved to Kansas City in 2001 from Canada, where I started to teach at the Kansas City Art Institute. I have served 13 of the past 17 years as interim acting and full chair within the program, and I'm currently serving as acting chair until the remainder of this year, and then I'll return to full-time teaching. In 2010, I moved out to Kansas with my wife and started my family, and I have been here ever since. I transformed the land very quickly into a haven for artists to visit, full of foundries, kilns, and backdrops for kind of theatrical digital and analog photo series of what we may do. And there's been several things that have happened out here in 10 years. It's hard to recall all of them, but it's been exciting to say the least. I continue to build things seasonally. Some things are props, some things are just to get out there and be active. Most things are built pretty basic. And of course, the weather takes a turn on most things. In 2015, I established a foundry with my two sons, the Wickerson Studio Foundry, because we were downsizing at the Kansas City Art Institute. Not so much downsizing, but moving things over to digital and building a fab lab. And I had to get rid of a lot of equipment that was pretty much sat on the pad and was antiquated and not so much in use anymore or need for the curriculum. So I took a couple of foundries home. I built a nice wood kiln from all the old kilns in the back. And where I once cast a lot of bronze and nickel, Monel, aluminum, iron, I was able to start processing that within my own foundry. This was the old sculpture building, the old fab lab, and I had done a lot of experimentations in aluminum that ended up going somewhere. This was the aluminum test series with a variety of sand molds and plaster sand molds and investment molds to see what I could cast on different consistencies of oil and water and sand. And I'd done some nickel casts and some installations around in town, including the Argentine Library, where 9 panels were put up in bronze. And I've done a lot of renovation projects through the A. Zaner Company and around the city. These were about 200 parts and pieces of cast iron replacements that were done in aluminum for the canopy downtown on 12th Street. Some forms maybe didn't come to full bronze fruition, but it was to ensure the sense of an insurance company insuring its own plates. I thought was interesting. We made the cover of KC Studio Magazine because we were doing so much activity out here in 2013 internationally, and that was a series of photo prints done by a couple of friends of mine from Poland and Holland. And that series really tied into the land and tried to capture what was happening, even though most of it was more theatrical than necessary. And Matilda came over from next door, and we did a little bit of a surrealist photo shoot here and incinerated some of the sculptures that had existed on the land for a few years. I continue to do promotional pictures for companies and businesses in town, just using the land itself as, like I said, a theater. This was one of the last large-scale pieces I had made on the pad at the sculpture campus at KCAI before it became a parking lot, and it was taken out onto the land late 2009 when I moved in. It is a place of respite, peace, and kind of quiet at times, but there's foundries and there's people casting metal and a lot of iron pours that happen out there seasonally as well. I have a large Onigama kiln, which I've since turned into a Bury kiln closer up to the house just to save on fuel and run off of natural gas. There's Hamlet's Mill in the background. And I've constantly been interested in iron pours, so using very primitive methods of tapping and recycling iron has always been of interest to me. I have traveled quite a bit doing that. This is a Suffolk US-UK exchange I was doing with Coral Lamford at the University of Alfred. And I've cast pretty much everything I've found on the land, from feathers to maple leaves to bones, shells, arrowheads, mushrooms. And the process is very simple. It's cope and drag, 2-part mold, where from original you can kind of work to remove that and cast within it almost immediately. Make these molds almost immediate so you can turn them right into the metals of your choosing. Working in multiples, working in series happens out here as well. And I commemorated the place through a few tractor seats just that sit and patina on the land. The furnaces themselves are still the large ones that came from Kansas City Art Institute. This is an aluminum pour. It takes about 3 hours at 110 blower to run in the backyard and pour into green sand. And this is the work of Levi Walker, where we were casting into some of his concrete forms out here. and fairly light material, so we can do it without the gantry, even though I do have a gantry out here to work in. It's seasonal because it's too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter, but spring and fall are a great time to experiment. In 2016, my daughter was born, and the same day my wife was in labor, I took my first digital print from Turnio on a cell phone and made it into reality. And I really didn't look back after that. And Ella had changed my life with my two other boys. So I realized the potential of working and educating them towards a digital framework, which I saw the future was current, already digital, and the future was going to include that. So they were the source and also inspiration of kind of digging into this for myself and getting back into lifelong learning. The students at KCAI started to do multiples, 3D prints, renderings, burning out. And I was modeling like crazy using the scripted program of AutoCAD, Tinkercad, to produce these images and import them into a more complex rendering and 3D modeling tool, Rhino 3D. It didn't take long before I realized I was interested in coding. And that coding found its way into Grasshopper and all of the plugins associated with modeling in Rhino 3D. I didn't know that this was going to move through the parametric model and node system into Python nodes and C# nodes and become scripting. And being a past math and computer scientist student at the University of Waterloo in the 1990s, this started to really click with me. And whereas I was interested in the forms on the left, I started to become much more interested in the scripts on the right. And I've since produced thousands of them and produced online video tutorials by the hundreds and become quite an open source on my GitHub for a community of people interested in this. Why ruin a morel every time you want to make a mold of one? I'd rather eat them. So taking a picture of one, scripting different iterations seemed more reasonable to end up with a series of different morels cast. Robotics has always interested me. Milling has always interested. Multi-axis mills have always interested me. Not only tied the chainsaw, but certainly into milling forms and sand molds and working directly within them. That's where I'd like to see this project go. And whereas Wickerson Studios' foundation is the analog, the Earth itself, it kind of rises up to this cosmos of how far my mind can get into the data driving these forms. I do have a kind of ideal foundry that I like to set up in different places. I think it's a one-person operation that can actually fabricate a variety of heavy metals. And from that process of digital, you can take it right through the sand molds fairly quickly and pull out zinc, aluminum, bronze, nickel. I like to recognize that coding is probably the most common language, even though it's not maybe not the first language. One of which that I can reach people that aren't English speaking, and with that power, I've managed to make wonderful iterations, recursive functions, fractal-based forms, multiples, using the maths, using all of the libraries that exist. And this is where really coding has taken over for me to the point of finding different iterations, generative models, and optimization for the forms I want to make. So these just sit as really not so much artworks as just evidence of where my mind goes. I threw in the towel literally back in 2018 in bronze and finished it off and said, without the reason to make bronze, why am I so set on single iterations of these processes? And I've only recently returned to it after a lot of computational studies with this project last term, which was a senior, and I love the process. You have an original, wax, found item, whatever you want, put it into a sand mold, flip it over, pour your metal in at cost, and finish the heat patina, oxidize it in the same moment. I think this is very close to some of the projects that might be possible in the near future. So thanks very much for watching. My name is Michael Wickerson. I'm very excited to take the Foundry Man and myself, demonstrate all of the computational and generative design I'm interested in, but also return to a sense of what Foundry has meant for me in my life and what the future might be. So thanks very much for watching.